And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist. Carly, I see you moving like you're starting to smile. I'm going to introduce you. You got about 10 seconds. Okay, so Carly Prentice Jones is a theater artist, a singer, an arts advocate, and a cultural advocate who seeks to elevate social consciousness through the arts. Carly is a proud Raleigh native and performs on stages throughout the region. She's a versatile artist. She performs in opera and musical theater, as well as in classic and contemporary theater. She attended Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where she earned a Bachelor of Music in Vocal Performance, a Bachelor of Arts in Black Music History, and a minor in Arts Management. And she and I actually met for the first time a few years ago through her role with the United Arts Council at a performance at the Governor's Mansion. It was pretty darn cool. So without further ado, Carly, you're up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne Monique, and thank you, Walter Magazine and Bank of America for having me today. This is a little bit of a different platform than I'm used to, but COVID, I wish I could see all of your faces in person because I'm such a people person, but so just try to, I'm going to try to engage with you as best as I can through this little screen here. But anyway, thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I wanted to kick off the chat that I have prepared for you today with one of my favorite quotes, which is actually very much related to the exercise that we just went through. And so I'm really glad that we did that workshop together because it relates very much to what I'm going to talk about with you all today. So here's the quote, and soak this in because it's one of my favorites. Sometimes just being yourself is a radical act. When you occupy space in systems that weren't built for you, your authenticity is your activism. All right, hear that again. Your authenticity is your activism. So that is a quote from the book More Than Enough by one of my favorite people, Elaine Welter Roth, who was one of the youngest chief editors for Teen Vogue. She also was the very first person of African-American descent to hold the role, and she completely transformed the publication. And this book is filled with jewels. I highly recommend it. But this is the quote that I constantly come back to because it really resonated with me because I have lived my life outside of the box my entire existence. And authenticity is what I've held on to for dear life to keep me sane. It keeps me sane in a society that is obsessed with labels and categorizing people. And I've always lived my life at the intersections. My very existence is at the intersection. I come from a multicultural family. My mother is white, my father's Black, and living and growing up in the 90s in Raleigh, North Carolina, that was sometimes uncomfortable for our family. I also have designed a career for myself that didn't fit neatly in one blueprint. And so I have found that my passions, my many passions collectively have brought me success at the intersections. And we live in this world of like spoken and sometimes unspoken rules and labels and boxes. But we're much more complex than that as individuals, right? We don't always fit neatly into a box. And we can try to mind map or life plan, which is always good. It's good to plan, but we can try to fit into one lane, but sometimes life happens to us, right? It changes even the most well thought out plans when we least expect it. And that's okay because that's what makes our story authentic. So I'm going to share one of those stories with you quickly. One of those stories for me after I'd pretty much planned my entire life was the day that I lost my voice. A couple years after graduation, where I majored in vocal performance, as you heard, and practiced for hours and hours in the practice rooms for 5 years on a music scholarship at Miami University of Ohio. I was getting gig after gig after gig and after college. And all of a sudden, I couldn't sing those money notes, which is what my vocal coach always called them. I couldn't sing those notes. It just didn't come out anymore. I went to the doctor and they discovered a benign cyst on my vocal folds. This was devastating for me because I had to have a surgery to have that removed. And the fear of losing my voice or coming out on the other end, um, not being able to hit those notes again, petrified me. After so many years honing my craft and practicing my technique, it meant so much to me. I'd been a singer my entire life. From an early age, I had many interests, but singing was steadfast. It brought me such joy to sing in living rooms with hairbrushes as my microphone, or out on my grandparents' tree stump with a stick as a microphone. As a young woman who came from two cultures, I oftentimes felt different amongst my peers, but on stage, I felt like my differences were celebrated. And to this very day, I feel empowered, seen, and heard in my fullness and in my authentic self when I'm on stage. That gift of connecting with an audience and making people feel is a powerful tool and a high that I cannot explain. And this is why I studied voice. This is why I went to school. And this was in my head, my calling. I was meant to sing and travel the world and sing opera. And that was what I was called to do. So when I was laid out on that stretcher 2 years after I graduated from college at Duke Raleigh Hospital, and I was about to be rolled into the surgical room and put under anesthesia, all I could think was, what happens if I can't sing the same way after this operation? All I could think of was Julie Andrews, the famous Julie Andrews, one of the most celebrated voices in our entire life. Um, Sound of Music, Mary Poppins. She had a vocal surgery, and after her surgery, couldn't sing the same ever again. Well, here was little old Carly Jones. I'm not Julie Andrews yet. So I was so scared. So I sang that one last note, what I perceived to possibly be that one last note, before being rolled into that room and put to sleep, and then going through that surgery. After the surgery, I had 6 months of silence to recover, 6 months of vocal therapy. And I was one of those girls in class who always got into trouble for talking too much. I'm sure there are many of you out there. um, but I had to find something quiet to do while I went through vocal therapy for 6 months. And this seemed like a setback in my life. And I was devastated and sad. And it definitely taught me to never take for granted what we are naturally given. But during that time, I leaned into my grant writing skills, which I'd picked up in some random classes that I took in college when I got my arts administration minor, which is something that my dad talked me into doing because he said, you know what, you never know what life will throw you. And here I was, here I was leaning into those grant writing skills. So during the time that my voice was healing, I started working for nonprofit arts organizations throughout the Triangle area, grant writing and figuring out ways that we could get arts organizations funding to be able to do the impactful work of the arts throughout our Triangle area. And I found that I really enjoyed it. I found an intersection, right? I talked about my connecting to people from the stage, but I found that I loved connecting to people no matter what sector of life I was in. And that love of public service and helping people and helping them find funds to bring more of what I love even more, the arts, into the world was a perfect intersection for me. After 6 months, I started singing again. I've sung better than ever. You'll see that I've sung on many stages throughout this region professionally, and I've taken on many different roles. But I had to choose. I said, well, what do I do now? Now I have this wonderful arts administration career. Well, can I do both? We're often raised thinking, oh, what we must pick one path, one true calling, and devote our lives completely to it. And that is what you are. That quintessential question of what will I be when I grow up caused lots of anxiety for me. And especially at this time, I hadn't heard of anyone having a dual career. But I am now a regional performing artist. I still perform professionally. I'm also a community builder in my activism work, and I'm an arts and culture executive at the North Carolina Arts Council. At the Arts Council, those passions intersect in that I am an individual artist. I know what artists need, and I know how to talk to artists while I'm working at the North Carolina Arts Council to help connect them to the funds and the money that they need to continue to practice and live in the state of North Carolina and practice their craft. When I worked with the Women's March on Raleigh for the first 3 years, I was the MC on the stage in front of thousands and thousands of women. The only reason I was able to do that is because of my work on the stage. I'd already had years of training and being in front of people and speaking and galvanizing people. I also brought women musicians on that stage because I knew that music could connect to the crowd even better than those speeches. So, as you can see, there are intersections everywhere, and we shouldn't be afraid of them. It's interesting to me how many times men who have multiple strengths and passions are often coined as serial entrepreneurs or risk takers, while multi talented women who explore various strengths and paths, we're often labeled as flaky or doing too much. That is toxic. We must bump that to the curb because if it weren't for the multi-talented women that we know and love, the Renaissance women of our society, we wouldn't have some of the greatest work and artists and entrepreneurs and innovators that we have. Take, for example, Maya Angelou. Most of us know her, Dr. Maya Angelou, as a poet. Well, she also was a professor, she was a dancer, award-winning composer, an activist. Would we ever call her flaky? No, we wouldn't. So I encourage you all that, especially at this time in your life, where you're constantly thinking, what do I do with my life? What path do I take with my life? Similar to the exercise that we just did earlier, it is okay. In fact, it should be celebrated to have multiple skill sets. You can have multiple skill sets. And what's fun is finding the intersections between those skill sets to design the life that you love. We must be bold and position our multiple skill sets as a strength, not a weakness. Don't shy away from it. Be authentic because authenticity, right? The quote, authenticity is your activism. That is what I have learned. And don't be shy about it. Speak about the work that you do. Especially, we just did this exercise where we listed all of the wonderful things that we're proud to have accomplished. We must shout it from the rooftops. We must be out loud in our life, in our work. It's the only reason I'm talking to you today, right? Walter Magazine, they wouldn't know what I do unless I talked about my work. So we must not shy away from that. It's important for us to celebrate the many skills and talents that we have. And it's okay to not fit into a box or a blueprint. In fact, celebrate that. Celebrate your authenticity. Thank you.